Well, I'm Malcolm and welcome to my shed. This is where I spend most of my time, when I can, when I'm not in Atlas Vantec. And my hobby here is restoring classic motorcycles. And what I have behind me here is a 1959 Matchless G12, which we're going to do a piston modification on, and I thought I'd share it with you.
Now I took this engine apart to clean out these oilways, which are the oilways that go into your rocker journals here, and what tends to happen is that these get sludged up, and I'd noticed that it didn't really matter how many times I tried to adjust the tappets, they were just clattering, and I noticed once I'd taken the cylinder head off that these were blocked up, and so also were these oilways in here which connect into the crankcase. So once I'd done that, I thought, well, while I was there, we could have a look at the pistons and sort of see what kind of condition that they were in. And the first thing that I noticed was that once I'd got the piston rings off, I've got a 30 thou feeler gauge here, and that just slides in, as you can probably see, into that gap. And the tolerance on this, or at least the values that they give for the piston ring gap, is 0.06 of an inch. So with the best will in the world, we're 24 thou above that. So this particular ring is worn out and it needs to be changed. The only problem with that is that these particular piston rings are a 3/64 piston ring, and at the time of actually filming this, I couldn't get a hold of 3/64 rings at all, and the only ones I could get were 16th rings. Well, that's all very well, but the problem is, how do you get that to fit in here? Because with the best will in the world, we're about 15 thousandths too tight for that piston ring to fit. And this is where we're going to modify these pistons, and what we're going to use is we're going to put this in the lathe like this, and then what we're going to do then is we're going to get this tool, and what we're going to do is we're going to take out about, we need to measure this, but around about 15 thousandths of an inch to give a bit of relief so these new piston rings can actually fit in there. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do some measuring just to make absolutely certain that that first of all that these pistons are good for the bores, and also I need to measure these gaps here so we can decide how much material to take out and leave some clearance for the vertical clearance on the piston rings. So let's get measuring. Now, I would strongly recommend that you only tackle one side of the engine, because this is a twin, of course, at one time. And what we're working on here is the right-hand side of the engine. So this is the right-hand piston. And I've also marked it inside here. You might just be able to see that, but I've marked that with an F, meaning front. So at least I know that that's the front right-hand side cylinder, or it's the right-hand side cylinder pointing frontways. So I want to put that back in exactly the same way. And it's like everything else here, mark everything up. That, for instance, is the exhaust push rod on the left-hand side, and that, of course, is the inlet on the right-hand side. And you'll spend an endless amount of time resetting this with feeler gauges and resetting the tappets, because everything will need to bed back in again. But if you put them back in exactly the same way, then you're really going to give yourself a head start on that. So this piston here, we know that it's a 40 thou oversized piston. So this engine has had a rebore at some time in its life. And the first thing I want to do here is I just want to check that this cylinder bore is within tolerance. So in other words, is it actually going to be serviceable? And feeling inside, there's not a huge amount of wear on here, which suggests to me that this engine was rebored and has not done a fantastic amount of miles. And I also want to make sure that we keep this piston, because these are very, very valuable pistons. These are Hippolytes, and you know, the new pistons tend to be a lot heavier, and they don't seem to perform as well. They don't expand the same way. So we really want to make sure that we keep these pistons. We don't want to change them. Now, we need to measure the bore here. We also need to measure the piston. So we need to get the relationship, because it doesn't really matter what that size is or what that size is. It's the clearance. It's the relationship really of the piston to the bore. And the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to use this this telescopic gauge here, and I've already set this to the bore size. And then what we can then do is we can, with a micrometer, we can get the value of that bore size. And if we just bring that up there. And that's it there. So we actually have a reading here of 2.876, which is 40 thou above the value that's in the book of 2.836. So what this is telling me is that we're exactly 40 thou above the original bore size. So this is correct. So I'm quite happy with this with this bore. The next thing to look at is the piston size. Now the piston here, this has a value of 2.8295 to 2.8287. We're just gonna work on this 2.8295 figure here. Plus we've got to add our 40 thou on top of that. So what we're looking at, we're looking at a figure here of 2.8695 is where we want this this piston to be. I've actually measured this piston, and what we need to do is we need to measure this at the skirt. Now there's ovality in this piston, so in other words, the figure that we get, one side of the piston at the skirt won't be the same 90 degrees round. So I'll just get this in here. So this is us measuring now the skirt front to back. Okay. So if that's front to back, these are the sides, and as you can see there, there's a massive difference between the two, and that's why on all of these pistons there is an ovality in them, and that value there comes out of the actual, as I have here, is 2.868, which means that the piston is actually 1.5 thousandths of an inch smaller than it should be. And this leaves an overall clearance in the engine of 8 thousandths of an inch, where actually we should have 6.5 thousandths of an inch of piston clearance. That's that clearance in there. Now, for an engine of this age, and for a motorcycle of this age, and really for what we're going to be doing with it, which is pottering around the local roads at 40-45 miles per hour, we're certainly not going to get involved in any heavy sort of 0 to 60 figures on this. I'm quite happy with that 8 thou clearance. The only problem that you might experience with having an 8 thou clearance on piston to bore ratio is a little bit of piston slap. But what we'll do is when we start the engine up, and once we actually start using it, we'll find out whether there's any piston slap in there. But a slightly, bigger sort of, to 1.5 thou bigger than really what the value should be there, I don't think is going to cause us too much issues. So at least we know that the pistons and the bores are good. The next stage is to figure out where we are with regard to the piston rings and how much material we actually need to take off the piston, and we'll come to that just shortly.